It's recording.
It's recording now?
Yeah, it says it's recording.
Okay.
Okay, is it okay now?
Yep.
My name is Carolyn Charette Kent. I was
No, the other way.
this way,
Yeah, woo, right there.
okay?
Yeah.
How about if I take my glasses off? Is
Yeah,
that
that's
better?
all right.
Okay.
You're centered now.
All right. I was born in Newmarket, New Hampshire, September 13th, 1931, to Sophie Victoria Novak and Archie Charette. Now I'm at a loss for words.
Where did you live?
We lived my mother worked as a maid, and we lived in a very large house. I can't remember the name of the people.
White?
I think their last name was White. We lived there until I was approximately 2 years old, and then we moved up on Pleasant Street and lived in the same house where my father's mother and father lived, my grandparents.
Keep moving around.
All right, I won't move.
This way.
This way, okay?
Yeah.
All right. We lived there until 1938 when my mother and father purchased their first home. Their first home was a small Cape Cod type house which had been built by the milk company located in our town. My father paid $2,000 for the house and a rather large amount of land. The land, we faced onto the river, the Lamprey River in Newmarket. The house was in fairly good condition, but had a dirt cellar. So my father had to, he poured cement to make the cement cellar. And we only had a bathroom. We didn't have a bathtub or a shower. My father built a shower down in the basement. And they did an awful lot of work. My dad built a porch. It was an open porch at first, and then he made it into a sunroom, and it looked out over the river. And my parents loved to spend a lot of time out there in the summer enjoying the view of the river. They loved watching the different boats that came up the river. It was a pretty active river. I attended Newmarket Elementary School. The school is now the fire station for the town of Newmarket. I had a favorite teacher. I had several favorite teachers. It's unusual, or it amazes me that the teachers proved to be my favorite teachers were the teachers who were the strictest teachers. I adored my first grade teacher. She was very pretty. My third grade teacher was one of the ladies who owned the house that my mother and father bought in Newmarket. Miss Young had taught my father, had taught John, and I believe he had taught, had she taught your father in school?
No, I don't think so. No, he only went to 6th grade.
Yeah, well, she was the 3rd grade teacher.
Yeah, but he was in Durham Point.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So growing up in a small town, it seemed like we had the same teachers. Another favorite teacher was Miss Locke. She too was very, very strict. If you became out of hand, you stayed after school and you did long division and you had to prove your long division. From these strict teachers, it seems like I learned a great deal. I attended high school in Newmarket. I enjoyed school a great deal. I was very active in many of the different clubs. I sang in the chorus. I participated in the school plays. I love to sing, and I had the opportunity of singing for various organizations in the town of Newmarket. I never mastered algebra. My favorite teacher, math teacher, was a man who looked exactly like one of my favorite actors. All the girls just adored him.
Mr. Stowe.
Yeah, Mr. Stowe is tall and lanky, and he had all the patience of Job trying to teach some of us Algebra 1, advised me not to go on to Algebra 2, which I did not do. I enjoyed a homemakers club. As a matter of fact, one of my friends in school, Agnes Blanchette, and I, when we were, I believe, either juniors or seniors, were in charge of making the sandwiches for noon lunch. The teacher, our home ec teacher, just so happened to, at that time, rent the upstairs of the home that John's parents eventually bought. She's the one who taught me how to knit, and my first project was rather stupid, but she didn't discourage me. It was making a pair of gloves, and I think I had more holes in my gloves than I cared about. But anyway, it was the beginning of knitting, and since that time, I've done a lot of knitting. I've tried to make Afghans for everybody in the family, and that's one of my hobbies. Another hobby of mine is reading. I enjoy reading a great deal. John always tells me that I'm the librarian. I read every night before I go to sleep. It relaxes me. So I spent a lot of time at the library. Met your father. We really grew up in the same town. So we've really known one another all of our lives. However, I never became interested in your father until I was approximately 13 years old, and that's when your father had his chicken farm. We had a hill, and the hillside that overlooked his chicken farm had blueberry bushes. So whenever I saw your father go by, I'd make sure to go up and pretend to be picking blueberries, hoping that he would notice me. Well, I never really knew whether he did or not, but when we were 15 and your father was 17 was the time when we started to notice one another, and of course everybody thought it was a fleeting romance, but it proved to be a good relationship. Well, we've been married going on 54 years. We eloped. We were married in Wells, Maine on August 4th, 1951. And the minister who married us was a little bit late for our wedding, which was in the evening, on a Saturday evening. And he brought his wife and another lady, Barbara, I think, Woodson was her name. The minister's name was McCullum. And they all smelled of popcorn. And it seems that they were at a youth function that evening, and they had been making popcorn for the kids. And I have a feeling that maybe they were thinking that maybe Dad and I would not show up. Anyway, we did. And it was a good thing we did, because we've been very, very happily married, and we proved everybody wrong. It's been very, very successful. I've loved your father all of these years, and I still adore him. Times when he does gripe me, but that's okay. Our honeymoon was spent apart. We did go out to Howard Johnson's for dinner that night. I was wearing my wedding ring. I was very proud of that. And one of us happened to notice that who should be having dinner at Howard Johnson's but one of your father's classmates. So your father says, "Hurry up, take off your ring." So I took off my ring, we ate our dinner, and we left. Your father went home to his parents' house, and I went home to my parents' house. We kept our marriage a secret from August until January.
April. Town report was at the end of May.
Was it April?
Yeah, town
April.
report was at the end of
my.
March.
Look how I forgot things. Sorry. Anyway, we kept it secret for that length of time. But then the town report was going to come out. Dad went down to the town clerk and spoke with him and asked if it could be kept out of the town report. Dad wanted to finish college, and I was working and saving money, so that's the reason we didn't tell anybody we were married. But the town clerk said he was sorry that this was public information and that it would go into the town report. So that's when we had to tell our parents that we were married. I think they were both rather surprised, but nevertheless, everything was very, very good. They accepted the fact that we were married. Our first place where we lived was in Durham, New Hampshire, in old barrack buildings, that World War II barrack buildings that were available for veterans and their families. Everybody was poor. Everybody had children. John and I were expecting our first child. We would, most of the men had attended school and worked. Most of the women who had children, of course, stayed home to take care of their children. I worked up until, I believe it was August, and then I stayed home awaiting the birth of our first child. Saturday night was a great night. We all got together. We had, in the summertime, we'd have cookouts, cheap hot dogs. We enjoyed everybody. We were all in the same boat, all poor, all veterans. And it was a good time. It was a very, very good time. Then we moved to Newmarket, back to Newmarket, our hometown, and we lived up on Spring Street. And this is where we awaited the birth of our son. Dad was going to school during the day, and he was working at the mica plant at night. And the night that, the evening on the night before Taylor was born, I walked down to my parents' house and had notified John that I was going to be there, that when he got off from work, that we were going to have to take a trip to the hospital. Taylor was born on October 24th, 1952 at the Exeter Hospital, and he was our pride and joy. He was a beautiful baby. Everybody thoroughly enjoyed him. He was a happy child. He loved people. He enjoyed being with his grandparents and his aunt and uncle. And then John and I continued our life, taking care of our son and enjoying one another. And then the following year in November, on November 7th, 1952, 53, our daughter, Norma Susan, was born. Well, we now call her Susan because she never liked the name Norma. Susan was born on probably one of the best duck hunting days ever. Dad took me over to the doctor's. I was having contractions, took me over to the doctor, and the doctor said yes, indeed, that Susan was on her way. But he sent us home. It was too early to go into the hospital. So on our way home, I wanted a coffee milkshake. So we stopped and picked up a coffee milkshake and drove back to our home on, we lived on Elm Street, not Spring Street. We lived on Elm Street. Took me home, and we waited and waited and waited until it was time to go to the hospital. Of course, poor John was chomping at the bit to go duck hunting. Anyway, Susan was born. She was a beautiful little girl with loads and loads and loads of dark hair. Another wonderful addition to our family. John graduated from college, I believe it was in June of 1953, and continued to work until he was to go on active duty with the Army. John went to Fort Benning, and I stayed in Newmarket with the children. I can't remember how long he was gone, but was it 6 months?
Yeah.
He was gone for 6 months for training, and then he returned home. And he had we had to have all of our goods packed and move to Columbia, South Carolina, where he was assigned to Fort Jackson. We lived in a excuse me. We lived in a small apartment at first, and then found out that we were going to have another child, so we knew very well we were going to have to move into something larger. And I believe we moved over to we moved to that one place, and then we moved to Lilac Lane, which had we moved to another place. I can't remember the name of it. That was...
It's like Forest Drive.
Was it Forest Drive? That's what it was, Forest Drive. We moved to Forest Drive. That's where we became pregnant with our third child, and we only had 2 bedrooms. So Dad found us a beautiful brick home, absolutely lovely, with a fenced-in yard and 3 bedrooms. So we moved to Lilac Lane, and we were there for several years until the house was sold. But first, Jay was born on November 7th, 1955 at the Military Hospital at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. The house was sold, so we had to vacate the house, but to our advantage, the house across the street became available. It was not as large as the one we were in, but we moved across the street and stayed there until John received orders. And what year was that, John? Do you remember?
56.
56. And we went to, that's when you went to Iran. So Dad took us back to Newmarket so we could be close to the grandparents. And we lived 241 South Main Street there in a nice, great, big, large house. And then that was sold while your dad was in Iran. So I found a house through a friend of mine that was in New Village, and the children and I moved there. And it was an enjoyable move because there were more children for our kids to play with. We lived there until Dad returned, and transferred in 1958 to, where did we go in 1958? Did we go to Colorado?
Yeah, Fort Carson.
Fort Carson, Colorado. And there were no quarters available, so at that time, and we moved to Security Village, and that's where Taylor started school. I remember one day when it was raining, and he had been taught he was never to accept rides from strangers. It was pouring, and the lady next door, he played with the children, but he was told, don't take a ride with strangers. So she tried to pick him up and bring him home, and he refused the ride, and he walked home in the pouring down rain. And the lady next door always got a big kick out of that fact. Quarters became available for us, and we decided that it would be best if we moved on base. It would be convenient for Father going to work, and the school was within walking distance for the children. So we moved into old military barracks again and remained there until Dad received orders for Iran. no, Germany, getting my information. So once again, we packed up. Dad was going to go to airborne school, so during the interim, we decided we would go back to Newmarket and would stay with Grammy and Grandpa Kent and be there for the time that Dad was at Fort Benning. Dad returned home, and we were able to get concurrent travel and flew over by military aircraft. It was a terribly long ride because it was with old prop plane. We were stationed. Our sponsors met us at the airport, and this was on a Saturday night. And of all things, there was a great big party that night, and the colonel, commanding officer, insisted that we attend this party. We were rather tired from a long trip, but he insisted. So we attended this party, and he said, bring the children along. They were tired. So we did attend the party, and we lived on the economy in Butzbach. Then our sponsor was transferred, so we moved to Bad Nauheim and lived in a 3-story house. It was a duplex, had pears and beautiful fruit trees in the back. We were there until quarters became available in Butzbach, and we moved to Butzbach on Texas Drive. The children attended school in Butzbach, and then John transferred from the artillery to the finance corps. So this meant a transfer down to Heidelberg, which is a beautiful city, much changed, I understand now. So we lived in Heidelberg for probably a year and a half, and then John was transferred back to the States and went to school in Indiana, the finance school. And then he was transferred. Where did we go after that?
Boston Army Base.
And we were transferred to Boston Army Base, which was good because we were close to family and we were able to visit family. And lived in a lovely little house. Then John was transferred. No, that's when you were transferred to, no, then we moved to,
Command General Staff.
yeah, then we lived in Winthrop for a
Yeah.
while. And then John was transferred to Command Staff College in Leavenworth, which was a nice year for the family. So our travels have taken us far and wide, and then John was transferred to Vietnam. And the children and I lived at Schilling Air Force Base in Salina, Kansas. Then John was transferred to Alaska, which is where we always wanted to go, and we've remained in Alaska, and I believe we will have lived there. Well, that was 1969. We drove up the highway. We bought ourselves a trailer, a camping trailer, and had a Ford station wagon, and we drove up the Alcan Highway, which was quite an experience at that time. The road was narrow, dirt road most of the way. We had a dog with us. We have a dog with us at that time? We had a dog. Did we have the cat too? No, we didn't have the cat, but we had the dog with us. Oh, we had Jonesy with us. We moved up to Fort Richardson, and then later bought a house on the... John kept extending and extending up there. We didn't want to leave, and finally they told John that no more extensions are going to Washington, D.C., so your father wasn't too happy about that. So he decided he was going to put in his papers for retirement. We bought a house and on Betcheroff Street in Anchorage. And we were there until your father retired, and upon retirement, Dad entered real estate, and we moved to Wasilla, Alaska, which is where we are now living. We opened up our own real estate agency and ran that for a while. I guess we'll probably remain in Wasilla, Alaska. In high school, I remember having 3 very good friends, although I really was friendly with most of my classmates. Marguerite Stevens Philbrick was one of my very good friends. And Marilyn Abbott Forbes was another one. And Josie Wardlaw was my 3rd friend. And the 4 of us seemed to hang out a lot together. We went our separate ways, and we've kind of lost touch with one another over the years. You want to shut it off? The red button shuts it off. Living in a small town with a population of 3,500, everybody knew everybody. And if you got into some mischief, your mother knew before you got home that you had done something. Anyway, I used to love green apples. I don't remember the name of the people, but they had this wonderful little tree. Now, the apples were over the sidewalk. So my friends and I thought that since the apples were over the sidewalk and not on their property, that we could pick these. Well, the owner wasn't too happy, and every time we went to pick the apples, I guess he must have had a spy out. He would chase us, call my mother. My mother would chastise me, and my brother, and anybody else who was with us. And we continued to do it anyway. I remember one time, I think Josie Wardman was with me, that the Shell gas station had a great big Shell sign propped up against a building. I wanted that sign. I wanted that sign so bad that I convinced Josie that we could roll it down the street, down the hill to my house, and I'd sneak it in. Now, mind you, this was a great big sign. Anyway, Josie and I did roll the sign down to my house. But we couldn't get it in the house. My father caught us. My poor father. He didn't know what to do. So he took the sign down in back of the cabin and he buried the sign. I wonder if it's still there. I must admit that I did do some things that I wasn't supposed to do, but I never did anything really bad other than stealing that sign. I remember when I was 15, my mother, trench coats were the style, white trench coats. So I convinced my mother that I needed a white trench coat. So I was very proud of that trench coat. I also decided that I wanted to dye my hair red. Well, I didn't use dye, I used a rinse. I think Josie was in on that one again. She was a good sport. Anyway, I put this red rinse on my hair. The next time I wore my white trench coat, the red ran onto the back of my beautiful white trench coat. Of course, my mother wasn't happy about the hair in the first place. And that was another thing that I remember doing. My brother and I were always getting into some kind of mischief together. He was a good sport. Earl died at a young age. He was only 42 from a massive heart attack. He had been in the military and had retired. not retired, I guess he had spent the required amount of time, and had moved back to New Hampshire, then moved to California for a while, and then moved back to New Hampshire. I guess he missed New England. And he worked for the town or the city of Portsmouth up until the time that he passed away. I remember my parents indulged my brother and me. And at that time, we just figured that that was what they were supposed to do. I never realized how much we were indulged until I grew up. I never realized how much they gave up until having children of my own. My father worked 3 jobs to support the family. My mother stayed home and provided everything we needed. Food. She was an excellent cook, although she hated cooking, but she was an excellent cook. And I remember my mother and her Kelly green coat that my father purchased for her. She always loved the color green. Her birthstone was emerald. She was born in May 3rd, 1915, I believe it was. She loved my father dearly. My father worked during the day at the shoe factory. He would come home for lunch, and then they would sit on the sofa in the living room together. They held hands all the time. My father would kiss my mother when he came home. He would kiss my mother when he went back to work. He would kiss my mother when he went out to work in his garden. They were very demonstrative to one another. So I think I was very fortunate to see this. I think it's helped a great deal in my own marriage, which has been, I think, a very successful marriage. I can remember my father's garden when we first moved into this house on Creighton Street. The backyard was just nothing but a mass of brambles. My father spent hours and hours cleaning this huge area. I don't know how big it was, but it was quite large. And he planted a vegetable garden. Half of it was potatoes, and the other half, corn, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, string beans, you name it, my father raised it. He raised so many vegetables that he was able to supply the neighbors with vegetables all summer long. My mother refused to can. She just absolutely refused to. But in the summertime, we had all sorts of wonderful, fresh things to eat. My father loved watermelon. When John and I lived in South Carolina at Fort Jackson, they came down to visit us. Excuse me. They were touring the East Coast. They were going on down to Florida. And I'm recording. And my father, John took took all of us, I think, to a vegetable market. My father purchased 6 huge watermelon. This was on their way back to Newmarket. He purchased these watermelon for the kids in the neighborhood, and he had them all over to eat watermelon. As a matter of fact, he started growing watermelon, and every year he'd have the kids over in the neighborhood to eat the watermelon. They even had a seed spitting contest. And I recently re-met one of the children who lived next door to us. And she remembers so much history about the family, the things that we used to do. And her family was poor, just like my family. And she remembers that my mother every year would make sure that Kitty, we called her Gertie at that time, that Kitty Mishu would have a good Christmas. Kitty's father did not believe in having a Christmas tree, but my mother always made sure that Kitty had something special for Christmas. My mother was very, very generous. As a matter of fact, both of my parents were very generous. If somebody needed something, money, my father was always forthcoming and lending people anything from a tool to money. Sometimes he never got it back. I think I mentioned that one of my favorite hobbies was reading. I can remember in the summertime walking up into the wooded area. We were the last house on our street, and there was like a path, only it was wide enough for a car to go up. And I used to go up into this pine grove, take a blanket and my book, and I would spend hours in that pine grove just reading my books. I thoroughly love books. John built me built me two beautiful bookcases in the house we live in now, and previous to that I used to buy paperback books. Being in the military, I would be giving them away, and during our travels. Oh, I must talk about our travels in the motorhome too. Anyway, let's go to that right now. We had several deaths in the family, to include Grandpa Kent, Dad's father, Ralph, and my brother passed away several months after Grandpa Kent died. And then 2 months after my brother died, my mother passed away from a cancerous tumor in her head. This was a great blow. But first, before I talk about the travels, I want to talk about Grandpa Charette coming up to live with us. We hired a couple to live with Grandpa Charette and take care of him. But he was unhappy with that arrangement. He was about 72, I believe. He didn't like that, and he decided he wanted to come to Alaska. So in November of 1977, a few months after my mother passed away, he called up, or had Kitty call, the girl next door, and tell us that he wanted to come up and live with us, or stay with us for a while. Well, we met him in Seattle. John and I had gone on a real estate convention to Hawaii, and on the way back, we stopped in Seattle and met my father. It was his first plane ride, and I remember we brought the poodle, my mother's dog, a French poodle named Bentley. And I had told Dad that on the plane he could get sodas to drink and water to drink. Well, he wanted beer. When he found out that they were going to charge him for $1 for beer, he thought, oh my, they're going to charge me for everything to drink. So the poor man never did order anything to drink while he was on the plane. We flew up to Anchorage with Dad. And by Christmas time, see, this was Thanksgiving, around Thanksgiving when we flew up with him. By Christmas time, he was telling us, sell the house in Newmarket. I'm going to move up here. He loved it. John made arrangements for him to take his first airplane ride in a small airplane. And he and the pilot, a friend of ours, went out spotting moose. Well, my father thought that was fantastic. Another thing that he liked was this little dive of a restaurant we used to go to, Red's Cafe. A little small dinky place. Red cooked right in front of you. I don't know how many stools he had up at the counter, but my father took John and me every Friday night out for dinner. Well, the dinner consisted of everything fried. Fried shrimp was my father's favorite. And of course, he really wasn't supposed to have fried foods, but we thought, he loves this, why not? He's lived a good, long life, and he missed my mother desperately. So we enjoyed our fried shrimp, but what was even better was the fact that Red could not sell beer, wine, or liquor. He just had a little cafe. However, when Red found out that my father liked beer, he invited my father to join him in his private selection, which he served in a Coca-Cola, paper Coca-Cola cup. My father thought that was fantastic. He was drinking beer in a place where they weren't supposed to drink beer. So that he and Red were close, real close. Then I believe it was my father was walking Bentley, the dog, and a German Shepherd attacked the dog, and we lost Bentley. So that was probably, February and March. In April, we had friends come up for Easter, and we went out to dinner. And that night, my father went to bed around 9 o'clock, and he said, "Damned good ham, damned good ham." He went to bed and passed away during the night. I think that John and I provided probably 5 months of happiness for him. We kept him busy. He insisted upon vacuuming. He insisted that his job was washing the dishes. Although we had a dishwasher, he washed the dishes. We took him every place. John took him all over the place with him when he had to go any place. So he thoroughly enjoyed those 5 months, but he wanted to be with my mother. So his passing was quiet and peaceful, and it was a blessing for him. Miss him. Miss them both. But that's life. Anyway, what was I I was going to talk about our travels. Since we had so many deaths in the family, plus I had an aunt and an uncle pass away, all within a year. John and I decided we were spending all of our days, 7 days a week, almost 24 hours a day it seemed like, working real estate. I had my license, and he had his, but I didn't like selling, so I ran the office. We had 16 people who worked in our office, and we decided we didn't need this hassle of all this work. We should do the things that we want to do now, travel, and enjoy life after losing so many people. My mother was only 63 when she passed. So we decided we were going to, we bought a mini motorhome, and that year we left Alaska, drove out of Alaska in August, and drove down the West Coast, and well, first of all, let me go back. In 1979, we went back to Newmarket and for a year to take care of John's mother, Grammy Kent. We went back there for a year to take care of her until Lois retired from teaching school in New Jersey. We had purchased a motorhome, a mini motorhome, to travel back to New Hampshire, taking our 2 cats, who immediately adopted Mother and left us behind. We stayed there for the year, and then we drove back to Alaska, and that's when we decided we don't need the hassle of real estate. So we opened the real estate office for a few months, and then we closed shop. We sold everything. We decided we were going to travel for a winter. And as I said, we left in August, and by December we were convinced that we enjoyed this type of living. So we drove back and forth in the little Mini for several years, would spend 6 months in Alaska, and of those 6 months, I believe 3 were spent fishing down on the Kenai River, and then eventually we went to Deep Creek and Kenai River. Kenai River is where I caught my first king salmon, which was 12 pounds. However, I have caught as large as 57 or 59 pounds king salmon. I have fished right along with John, and one summer I outdid him. I don't fish anymore because I have arthritis in my hands and I can't hold on. Plus, I'm over 65, and at that age, you can give anyone your proxy and they can fish for you. So I'm worth twice as much now to John because he gets to catch my fish and he likes that. Okay, so we traveled 6 months in Alaska, 6 months outside. We visited wonderful places I never ever thought I would visit. We visited old friends, relatives, enjoyed every moment of it. Then we decided, well, we decided we needed a bigger motor home, and so we bought a Pace Arrow. We left the Mini up in Anchorage, and we left the Pace Arrow down in the low 48, and we flew space available via the military transportation system. And we did this type of living for approximately 16 years. It was wonderful. I'd love to go back and do it again. But we're getting a little bit older, and eyesight's not as good as it used to be. Reactions aren't as good as it used to be. However, we are doing a little bit now. We sold the Pace Arrow, and then we bought a bounder, a 34-foot bounder, and we still have that. That's, I think, 15 or 16 years old. We consider that our fishing camp. We have babied it along, and I guess no sense selling it. We wouldn't get enough money for it anyway. And then just about a year and a half to 2 years, almost 2 years ago, we purchased a 28-foot bounder. Oh, wait a minute. We purchased a 28-foot bounder. Oh dear. Wait a minute. I've got to put this off. I've got to go plug in the telephone because the battery's low. Okay, that's taken care of. Telephones are plugged in. I don't know where I was. Oh, I guess I was saying, oh yeah, when we were at Fairfield, California, Travis Air Force Base, the credit union had a 28-foot bounder the same year as what we had for sale. And so we put a bid in on this, and we won the bid. So that meant we had 2 motorhomes down here, a 34-footer and a 28-footer. We took the 28-footer and we drove that one back to Alaska and used that for several years. And then I'm trying to remember, it just seems, yeah, we did. We used that. Anyway, now we've downsized again, I guess you could say. Now we have a 1996 bounder, and we store that at Fort Lewis in Washington State, Tacoma area. And we have unfortunately not used it as much as we would like, but we're hoping to be able to do more traveling. We're both feeling much better. In 1993, John was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and we chose to go to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, to the hospital there, Wilford Hall, which is a training hospital, huge facility, where Dad had surgery. We were there for 9 months, and during that time, they found that his right eye was leaking fluid. So he had several treatments of laser surgery there. When we returned to Alaska, it was decided that it was decided, I believe, that John needed to have not chemotherapy, radiation. So they sent us to, see, he had the surgery in January. We returned to Alaska. He had the surgery the end of January. We returned to Alaska either the end of March, I believe, or April. It was determined, since the cancer had spread, that he needed to have radiation, and they sent Dad to Madigan Army Hospital, which is in Fort Lewis, and we were there from May, June, until around the middle of July, when he completed his treatment, and we went back to Wasilla and drove the motorhome down on the Kenai, where he was able to fish the last 2 weeks of the king season, for reds and kings. So at least he did get a couple of weeks of fishing then. And he has recovered and has had no recurrence of the cancer, for which we are most thankful. His eyesight in his right eye required many laser surgery treatments, and his right eye, surprisingly enough, it has healed. The left eye, unfortunately, has the same problem and has had laser surgery, and there's can't take any more laser surgery in that eye. So they are hoping that this eye also will improve itself, and hoping that it won't get worse. So in spite of all this, and then it was discovered that he had sleep apnea, and I remember back at Elmendorf Air Force Base Hospital, they discovered that he was in AFib. And when in Texas, they cardioverted him 5 times, and he was allergic to the medication, which would have kept his heart beating normally. So he is always, he's in AFib, and there's nothing that they can do about the AFib. Fortunately, it's a mild case of AFib. And then he also has sleep apnea. So in spite of the various illnesses, I think he is doing exceedingly well, and he's keeping active. And I have, I believe it was in 1995 or 96. No, it wasn't 95. It must have been 96 or 97. I became ill, and there was a spot on my lung, so I had surgery, and thank God it was not cancerous. I also suffer from diabetes and type 2 and high blood pressure, and in spite of all of those things, I feel I'm extremely healthy. I'm active, have no complaints about my life. I think my life has been one of joy and happiness, and I married the right man. He's my knight in shining armor, and he'll always be my handsome young man. Let's see, what else can I talk about? Oh, I never, when I was in school, we studied geography. I guess it's called social studies now, I don't know, but it was geography then. And I remember studying about all of these different places, Germany and Italy and Switzerland and Liechtenstein and Alaska. Never ever in my life thinking that I would ever see these wonderful, magical places. Well, I was lucky. I've seen those places. I've even been up and seen the Bering Sea in Nome, Alaska. Dad and I have been fortunate enough to have flown up to Prudhoe Bay twice. Both times it was exciting. I never thought I'd ever do that. Never thought I'd be in Alaska. Never thought that I would travel in all states except one. Dad's been in all. But for some reason, I've missed Kentucky. I don't know how, but I did. Every place that we have visited has had its own beauty. I think I've been very fortunate. We have 3 wonderful children. I think they have adjusted beautifully. They're all quite successful. I have 3 wonderful granddaughters, Elizabeth Ann, Susan Lorraine, and Catherine Allison, and we have a precious, wonderful little great-grandson, Austin Brian Butterfield. We don't get a chance to see them as often as we would like. They're beautiful. I love my grandchildren. I think we have been blessed. We've been blessed with the 3 children, 3 wonderful children, and 3 wonderful granddaughters, and a beautiful, wonderful little great-grandson. I think I could go back and reminisce about my life. Had some good times, more good times, I must admit, than bad. But with everything, every experience, there's been a lesson learned. I've learned that no matter how old I become, I'm not too old to learn something. I was forced into learning a computer when Susan gave me her computer. And then Taylor decided I needed to have another computer, so he built a computer, which was very simple. Then he decided I needed something a little more advanced. And what he gave me was a little bit too advanced. I kept saying, Taylor, I don't want all that stuff. But he doesn't listen. He just goes his merry way. So I have become computer literate, but not too literate. At least I know how to get on and send email, and then now I'm learning how to use a digital camera, which has been fun. I didn't think I would use it as much as I have. So I've done that. Let's see. Well, let's go back and talk about when my family first came to this country. My French family and my Polish family. My French family arrived in Canada in 1642 from France. The name is spelled so many, many different ways and pronounced many different ways. And it depended upon whoever was writing the documents. And some spelled the name phonetically. The earliest spelling that I have is Cherot, C-H-E-R-O-T, which has been changed to Charest, Charest, Charette, and the list goes on and on and on. And I understand that the original meaning is cart, a small cart, that like a cart with 2 wheels that can be drawn by an animal. My family settled up in Quebec later, and there is a town, Charette, in Quebec. I understand there's hardly anybody there, a small population. And then there's also a town, Charette, in Missouri, which is practically non-existent now, a small crossroad. And I believe there's a destroyer that was named for Charette. It's a lot of history in our family, and I've just become interested in it. And I've met wonderful people on the internet who are relatives. The Polish side of my family landed in Boston, Massachusetts, and settled throughout the Massachusetts area, and then branched out to various other states. They did not come over until, I believe it was the early 1900s, and right now the name of the ship that they came on escapes my mind. It's California, something like that. But then I've also met a lot of people on the Polish side of my family through the internet. And John, would you check this to see what I have left on that thing when you get in here? I managed to make up a notebook for the family, not documenting, but listing the relatives and so forth, so that they would have a sense of being, who they are and where they're from. I would like to be able to do the Kent side of the family, but that one is so involved that I do have some information, and I also have information on others in the family. But
101?
Huh?
Says 101:35.
You shut it off. Would you shut it off? And no, don't shut it off. I'll have to come over
Read
there and
that number.
see the number. Can't
How much time do we have?
an hour on each
Looks like
tape.
it's going over.